framework as the foundation for the program. We're happy to be working with NIST on the ongoing program and happy to have Jeff here to explain the framework. And so, Jeff, thank you for being with us. Can you please share with us the origin of the framework and its key pieces?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Great. Well, thank you for having me here today. Appreciate the opportunity to share about the cybersecurity framework. I'll talk a little bit about the history of the framework, some key components of the framework, and kind of set the stage for the respond function that we'll be talking about today. So just to give some foundational knowledge, the origin of the cybersecurity framework is really an executive order 13636 issued by President Obama in February of 2013, and really designed for improving the cybersecurity of our nation's critical infrastructure. So in this executive order, like many executive orders or laws, different agencies had to-do lists, and one of NIST's to-do list was to create a framework to help manage cybersecurity risk for the owners, operators of critical infrastructure, most of which is owned privately. So from 2013 till February of 2014, over that year, NIST embarked on a collaborative effort with really all interested stakeholders from industry, academia, government agencies, really in that collaborative process through different workshops across the country and different parts of the country, really through requests for information, requests for comments. NIST issued a draft and got more input from the draft. So really after a year, in February of 2014, NIST issued version 1.0 of the cybersecurity framework. And it's a living document. It's been a few years now, and NIST is in the process of going through that collaborative process again to update the framework to version 1.1. I think it was on December 5th. Our second draft of version 1.1 was released, and we accepted comments through January 19th. But we're always happy to receive feedback about the framework. So if you haven't had a chance to read through draft number 2 yet of version 1.1, please do so and send any feedback to cyberframework@nist.gov, and we're happy to hear your thoughts. So a little bit of information about the components of the framework. The framework core, you can really think of the core as a taxonomy of cybersecurity outcomes. And they're organized by these 5 functions that you see on the screen here: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So it's not really a checklist that you go down the list and say, yep, I've done this, I've done this. It's really looking through these outcomes, and this will get into the next element, the profiles. Profiles are ways that different organizations, through the different needs they have, take the subcategory outcomes of the framework core, and they prioritize what's most important to their organization. So there are 98 subcategories currently. I guess there'll be a few more in version 1.1, but they're organized by these functions. They're not prioritized in any particular way. So different organizations have different business mission requirements, different regulatory requirements, different operating environments, different threat profiles. So these subcategory outcomes will be more or less important to different organizations. So a framework profile is a way to prioritize these outcomes in a way that will help the organization best meet their requirements, their needs. And then the third component of the framework, the cybersecurity framework, is the implementation tiers. We receive lots of comments about the tiers. They're a little bit difficult to understand, but basically the implementation tiers are sort of an introspective way for an organization to look at their maturity. Like, how mature are we in our cybersecurity risk management? And we kind of think about it in 3 ways. First of all, does our organization have a repeatable for managing cybersecurity risk? Number 2, is our management of cybersecurity risk, is it integrated with other types of risk in our environment, or is it sort of siloed off and someone else takes care of it? And then thirdly, how much are we interacting with and integrated with external partners? Do we know our place in the ecosystem? Do we know our place in the supply chain? Do we receive and share information with our partners? So that's a little bit about the framework. So the last few months, we've looked at identify, protect, detect, and this month we're moving on to respond. So identify, we looked at the assets, the business processes that are most important to our business, our organization. We talked about ways to protect them. Last month, we looked at detect because we can protect all we want, but you'll never be able to prevent every incident from happening. You have to be able to detect, and that leads us into responding. So the definition from the framework about respond is that it really supports the way for us to contain the impact of a cybersecurity incident. You know, we're not going to be able to stop all damage, but we want to be able to contain the damage and lessen it. So it's really dependent upon being able to detect. You know, we've seen definitely breach notices from the last few years where, you know, it turns out there was an adversary that was inside of an organization for months or years. So it may lend to maybe organizations are having problems detecting. If you can't detect, you're not going to be able to respond. So response is very much dependent upon detecting. So, and lots of things in life, the better planned you are to respond, the better the results are going to be. And that considers things like notifying what are people's roles and responsibilities with responding? What are our reporting requirements? Do we have relationships with maybe our equipment vendors ahead of time? And then nothing's ever going to be perfect. Maybe there's an incident, we respond the best we can, and we realize things that we maybe need to do better. So we have a lessons learned. So we take those things, we learn from what went right, what went wrong, we improve our plan for next time. So I guess with that all said, I probably talked too long already. I'll kind of pause here and give the other great panelists a chance to share their great information.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for explaining the cybersecurity framework. I really appreciate it. You know, it's really an incredibly valuable resource for the small business and medium business community, so I appreciate it. And we appreciate all the work being done by our partners at NIST. So we're going to move on to our next speaker. We are pleased to welcome Tammy Smith from FedEx to share her expertise. Tammy Smith is a cybersecurity advisor at FedEx and has been protecting computers and servers from malicious software at Fortune 500 companies since 1998. She moved from general network administration to full-blown information security practitioner when Saks Fifth Avenue formed a dedicated information security team in 2004 and continued in that role until joining FedEx in 2012. In addition to managing endpoint security tools, such as antivirus software, Tammy is a member of the FedEx Incident Response Security Team. Tammy has a BS degree in information technology from Colorado State University and is a certified information systems security professional. When not fighting malware, Tammy is one part mom, one part taxi driver, and one part musician. So Tammy, I'm going to give you the stage.
Thank you, Daniel. So I want to talk to you today from the point of view of a technical incident responder. John Chambers, who was the CEO of Cisco, once said that there are two kinds of companies, the ones that have been hacked and the ones that don't know that they've been hacked. In 2016, it was estimated that 34% of U.S. companies were breached. And really, these are the ones that we know about because they were either discovered by a third party or they discovered it themselves and reported it. There could be more than 34% who either did not know that they were breached or perhaps they knew and attempted to cover it up to protect their reputation. But that's 34% that we know about. And that number actually increases to 48% of companies that have like Internet of Things devices on their network. So basically, in the United States, your odds of getting struck by lightning are 1 in 700,000, but your odds of experiencing a data breach as a business owner are 1 in 3 or even 1 in 2 almost if you are using Internet of Things devices. I think the worst part of this is that 74% of these businesses don't know how it happened, and they're not able to go back and figure out how it happened and what all they have lost. 95% of all of these breaches involve human error in some form. It could be that somebody fell for a phishing attack and clicked on a link in an email that they shouldn't have, or some type of social engineering. Maybe they got a call requesting a password reset and they didn't do their due diligence to determine that that was an authorized user of that user account. But we have a lot of technology to help us, and there's really no technology that can overcome the human error, which is why we really have to be diligent in monitoring. And there just isn't any sort of business or organization that is immune to this. And also on the flip side of that, there's no single security tool that's a panacea for all of the problems that we face. Typically, you're looking at to detect and respond to a breach, a multitude of tools, a lot of different layers of security. I think one of the biggest things with people and businesses and organizations failing to prepare themselves for responding to a breach is that they don't even understand that they're a target. I have talked to many individuals and business owners who have basically said, I don't have anything that's all that great. Nobody would want what I have. And I just don't think that that's where I want to spend my money. Maybe I'd rather spend money on sales and marketing or something that's going to generate more revenue for my company. But I would challenge you to as anything has something that's worth stealing. And even if you don't have something that you think is worth stealing, an attacker doesn't even have to steal it. They can just lock you out of it and demand a ransom for you to get access back to it again. So if there's something that's valuable to you, it is valuable to an attacker as well. So I'd like to reiterate what Jeff just said about, the first step of preparing is knowing what you have. You have to identify what's on your network. You need to know what devices are on your network, what software do you have, what is supposed to be there software-wise and what's not supposed to be there software-wise. You need to know what sensitive data you have. Is it PII? Is it payment card information? Is it medical information? What sensitive data is on your network and where is that stored? Secondly, you need to know who has access. If you're not doing some sort of routine review of who has access to sensitive data, that's one of the first steps. Reviewing that access on a regular basis and logging access, all access to data, is very critical to protecting yourself and also to understanding what happened after a breach. So one of those preparations would be implementing a really robust centralized logging mechanism. I would say that's definitely one of the most important things to do. By default, Windows computers, which is what most businesses are using, they don't log the events that you need to see by default. So if you're dependent upon those default configurations, when something bad happens, you will not have the data you need to go back and figure out what wrong an attacker did. So making sure that you have an adequate amount of logging, that you're logging the right things, that you log not just like failed attempts, because historically people thought, well, if I log the failed attempts, I'll see if somebody's trying to like brute force a password. But if you don't actually log the successful attempts as well, then you don't know who accessed what and when they accessed it. And definitely, yeah.
Tammy, it looks like we've lost you. Are you still there? Looks like Tammy. It looks like we've lost connection with Tammy here. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, sorry, we couldn't hear you there for a moment.
I do not know what happened there. So what was?
Oh no.
where should I go back to?
I think, moving to slide 8, I understand the problem before you take steps to attack it. I think that's where we can go.
Okay. So when you are responding, if you do encounter a breach or some type of malicious software event, it is very important to respond carefully and not have knee-jerk reactions. So you need to understand what your problem is.
Tammy, it looks like we lost you again.
Okay.
There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm not sure what's going on there. You need to understand the scope of your problem. Is the attack targeted or is it widespread? You want to understand how the attacker gained access and which systems are impacted, what data you've lost, if any. And you need to understand these problems before you can take steps to contain the problem. And you have to do everything possible to preserve your evidence. A lot of times people will react to a problem and take steps that destroy evidence, like re-imaging a system or running antivirus scans, patching systems. Once you have taken those steps, if you have not made some sort of a forensic copy of your data, you may lose the evidence that you need to actually understand the problem. And then once you have you've got what you need to understand the problem, then you can start to take the steps to contain the problem, whether that's taking systems offline or blocking the access method of the attacker, changing passwords in your environment, whatever those are. And then I would encourage companies, if they experience some sort of a significant data breach, consider bringing in a third party to help you respond to the incident, because it can cost a lot of money, but sometimes it's cheaper in the long run. Most of these companies they're specialists at what they do, and most regular businesses are not specialists at responding to an incident. That's not your normal business. And even if you have an incident response team, that's not the everyday job of those team members either, typically. So your incident happened with your current staff in place. So having a third party come in gives you a second set of eyes. It helps to keep everybody honest. And whether if your people were at fault, whether they're your own staff or they're hired, as a service or a vendor, you want to know if they're at fault, if they're not at fault. And having a third party can help you prove either one of those. And even when your current provider isn't at fault, your own internal people may not have the type of forensic skills needed to understand the breach fully. And we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so I would say that once you have covered all your bases and you understand as much as you can about your incident, that's when it's time to take the steps to remediate. And you want to be sure with every incident to analyze what the problem was, how it occurred, and take those lessons learned and implement them into your daily security routines to prevent that same type of incident from the future. There's a lot of different tools available to companies, software and services that are available to help companies both detect and remediate in some cases. But good security doesn't have to be expensive, and you don't have to have the latest and greatest tools. I would say even don't invest in those latest, greatest tools if you haven't covered some of the basics of security, like the principle of least privilege, where you don't give users more access than they need. Making sure you have a good password policy, and consider implementing two-factor authentication, especially on privileged accounts. Doing those access reviews so that you know who has access and who has used that access. And then some of the other basics like patching your systems when patches become available, logging everything, every type of access and changes that are being made to the systems should be logged. And having good backups, preferably backups that are stored offline, off-site even, to where that if you have some sort of an attack, like a ransomware attack, you would not want your backups to be compromised by that attack. So having them offline, off-site is a really good idea. And then some other basics like segmenting your network so you don't have, maybe you have a thermostat, a smart thermostat on your network, and you don't, that thermostat shouldn't be on the same network segment as like your servers. So there's some basic things that can be done that can really improve your security posture and also help you to respond to incidents.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And you're exactly right. A lot of people first cite cost as a reason why they don't take any steps towards creating a more cyber secure posture. And there are some very simple steps small businesses, medium-sized businesses can take, such as those you outlined. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with the group, and thank you to FedEx for being a partner to small and medium businesses. And I want to thank the audience for sticking with us through some of our connection issues. They're as common in life, or definitely death, taxes, and technology hiccups. Those are guaranteed, right? So I appreciate you all sticking through it. And so next we are going to have Eric Jones, and he is from the Small Business Administration, the U.S. Small Business Administration, and he is the Technology and Innovation Partners. He leads the Technology and Innovation Partners Program, TIPS for short, which is a public-private partnership working with best-in-class technology companies to provide free technology education and training to U.S. small businesses. Prior to the Small Business Administration, he held executive positions with 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers, and worked at Disney, where he focused on strategy, business development, and new technologies. Jones started his career in investment banking at Morgan Stanley, and his passion for product, brand, and technology has led to personal investments in many early-stage companies, highlighted by Dollar Shave Club, FitMob, acquired by ClassPass, and Bonobos. He is also the inventor of Rustolex. He was a Larry Wolfen Entrepreneurial Spirit Award recipient while earning his MBA at UCLA Anderson. Jones graduated cum laude with his bachelor's degree in economics from Cornell University. And so, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Daniel, thank you very much. And can everyone hears me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Well, I want to spend a little bit of time briefly talking about the SBA. We're going to cover some good information in this presentation, but I always think it's important to be able to find out where are some resources for that, those next level questions. And then I want to go over some of the top 10 tips that we have here at the SBA. So I want to start off with a quote that I think is very important on the next slide. Is when you think about reputation, it's a lifetime to build and seconds to destroy. So this comes from Robert De Niro, and it is very important that everything that you do as an individual or as a company, that you continue to build on the trust of your customers, your consumers that are out there. And if a mistake does occur, you need to quickly react, be honest, and forthright to those impacted. So now if we flip to the next slide, a lot of people think about SBA and they initially just think, oh, this is a great organization where I can go get an SBA loan to help me with financing. That is true. But we also help with government contracting. During disaster, such as the hurricane season, we helped approve over $6 billion in home loans for those who were suffering. But then we also have a very large counseling component that works with small businesses to help them with a variety of issues, including cybersecurity. So we can flip to the next slide. If you ever want to reach out, or if you ever have questions for someone to point you in the right direction, the SBA has 68 district offices and satellite branches across the country. We also have numerous resource partners from our SBDCs, our SCORE, Women's Business Centers, and our Veterans Business Outreach Centers that last year worked with over 1.4 million small businesses. And then I always throw out the website there because it's if you're not near any of those locations, you can come to our website. And if we switch to the next slide, if we really want to talk about cybersecurity, here are 10 tips that we think that as a small business owner you really need to understand. So the first one is you got to protect yourself against viruses and spyware. So make sure that each of your business computers are equipped with antivirus software and anti-spyware, and also to update them regularly. Sometimes the software is readily available online from a lot of different vendors, but a lot of times the software vendors regularly provide these patches and updates to the products. So make sure that you're constantly updating them. The second tip that we have is ensure that you secure your networks. So safeguard your internet by connecting using firewall and encrypted information. And then also, if you have a Wi-Fi network, make sure that it's secure and hidden, just so that not everyone can easily access it. The third big tip that we have is establish security practices and policies to protect sensitive information, right? Obviously, I think some of our earlier speakers said you're going to get hacked. Just if you do, make sure that the sensitive information is not there. So make sure that you've established policies on how employees should handle and protect personal identifiable information. Number 4 is you want to make sure that you're educating your employees about cyber threats and how to hold them accountable. So by educating your employees about online threats and how to protect your business data, make sure that you include the use of social networking sites. Yeah, that's something that everyone uses. It's been integrated into the way we conduct business. And then number 5 is moving on. Require employees to use strong passwords and to change them often. I know this is often annoying, but it's the little things that can really help you out from an attack, a successful attack. So moving on to the back portion, the last 5 items. At number 6, we say employ best practices on payment cards. So, work with your banks or your card processors to ensure that the most trusted and validated tools and anti-fraud services are being used. And, another question is, are you ready for the shift from that magnetic strip payment cards to a safer, more secure chip card technology? Some of this is basic, but some of this are basic things that people haven't implemented. Number 7, what we say, make backup copies of important data and information. And I definitely heard this, so now I'm just preaching to the choir, which is great that a lot of us have some of the same best practices. At number 8, control physical access to computers and network components. So it's prevent access or use of business computers by unauthorized individuals. Laptops can be particularly easy targets for theft and can be lost. So make sure that you lock them up when they're unattended. A lot of times people don't necessarily think about the physical component, but it's very important. And then in addition, create a mobile device action plan. So mobile devices can create significant security and management challenges, especially if they hold confidential information or can be accessed through the corporate network. So again, require passwords on the devices, encrypt the data. And then finally, protect all your pages, not just your public facing pages. And not just the checkout and sign up pages. So those are the top 10 tips that we have. And if you flip to the next page, I really just want everyone who's attending is go to the sba.gov/managing-business/cybersecurity. And there's a tremendous amount of information. It's worth 5, 10, 60 minutes of reading. And we've really tried to capture the best that's available. All right. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for sharing your expertise and for the work you and your colleagues at SBA do to support small businesses. And I don't want to forget the resource partners within SBA. So moving on to our next speaker, we have Reggie McKinney from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Reggie currently serves in a dual role capacity at the department. He is the program manager overseeing the C3 voluntary program, where he works with public and private industry stakeholders to manage their cyber risk and improve the overall cyber resiliency of the United States' critical infrastructure sectors. Mr. McKinney also serves as the Personnel Clearance Manager for the Cyber Information Sharing and Collaboration Program, overseeing efforts in coordinating critical infrastructure and private sector stakeholder clearance processing through collaborative efforts with the DHS Office of Chief Security Office and the DoD Defense Security Office. So Reggie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Daniel, and good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to join you, and hopefully you're getting a lot out of the presentation today. So again, my name is Reggie McKinney, and I'm the program manager for the Department of Homeland Security's Critical Infrastructure Cyber Community Voluntary Program, or CQ. And as Jeff mentioned earlier about the cybersecurity framework, the voluntary program was born out of Executive Order 13636 as well. And the voluntary program was developed to provide tools and resources to private sector critical infrastructure to support the adoption of the cybersecurity framework. So today, I'll just be taking a little time to speak to you about DHS resources you can access to help you respond to a cyber incident. Next slide, please. So before I dive into resources, let me just set the scene a bit by quickly discussing how to prepare yourself before requesting response support from DHS should you suspect or experience a breach. Hopefully it won't happen, but just in case, we're here to support. So this slide lists the kinds of information you want to be thinking about when reporting to our NCIC, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So information about your organization, operations and systems, how and when the incident was detected, response actions taken so far, and other organizations that have been notified. So I might note that you could report an incident at various stages. So when you report, you may not know exactly what's going on, and that's okay as well. So of course, there is no obligation to report an incident to DHS. Ours is a strictly voluntary system, but we're here to assist you should you need support. Some entities, however, are required, by law or by contract to report incidents in to other organizations or regulatory bodies. Next slide, please. So once you've gathered the information, you're ready to reach out to DHS. So within DHS, the Operations Center responsible for helping organizations respond to cyber incidents. It's called the National Cybersecurity Communications and Integration Center, or the NCIC. The NCIC coordinates with law enforcement as well, and we do have representation from our law enforcement, FBI, Secret Service, within the NCIC. So as you can see on the slide, there are two ways to request incident report from DHS, by phone or online. So you can see here I have the phone number listed up on the slide. The online system is available through the US CERT website, which you can find also on the slide, or you can just simply go down to the go to the us-cert.gov and scroll down to the bottom of the page and click Report Incident. So the site links to an online form. Organizations are asked to provide as much information as possible so that the response team can best understand the situation. Next slide, please. So next, I would like to take a moment to talk about our DHS cybersecurity advisors, known as CSAs. So as you know, responding to any type of incident, whether it's cyber attack or a natural disaster, requires not only a good plan, but also solid relationships with individuals and organizations that can help you. So I would suggest establishing a relationship with the CSA in your region. Our cybersecurity advisors provide technical support to owners and operators of critical infrastructure and government departments and agencies. They are trained to help organizations across the range of issues, including incident response. So as you can see on the slide, you can see the email address for reaching out to our CSA team. So that's cyberadvisor@hq.dhs.gov, and we have them spread out through the FEMA region. So if you need them, please reach out to them. Next slide, please. So staying in touch. So finally, I would like to invite you to visit our website, which offers a wide range of cybersecurity resources. You can see our address there, the us-cert.gov /CQVP. If you would like to receive our monthly bulletin, which features upcoming events and no-cost cybersecurity resources to aid in your preparedness and resilience, simply go to our homepage and scroll down to the subscribe alerts function at the bottom of the page. I've also included our email address here as well. Next slide, please. So if you have any further questions about the program or any of the various free tools and resources that we have to support you in your incident response, please feel free to get in touch. The CQ mail address is up on the screen. Thank you again very much for having us here to support. And Daniel, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Reggie. I have to reiterate that Cyber Bulletin is really an excellent resource for everybody to stay up to date on tips and resources. And to reiterate what Reggie said about the cybersecurity advisors, establishing a relationship with people early on is really important. You don't want to wait until you detect a breach to go out and find support. You want to go out and be proactive and find support early on. And so with that, I want to thank you, Reggie, for presenting and introduce our next speaker, Elisa. And let's see here. Elisa Gilson is an attorney in the Division of Privacy and Identity Protection in the Bureau of Consumer Protection at the Federal Trade Commission, where she works on investigations, litigation, and policy matters related to consumer privacy and information security. Before joining DPIP, Elisa was an attorney in the FTC's Division of Enforcement, where she worked on order enforcement, including privacy, security, and advertising matters. Before joining the FTC, Elisa was an associate at Sidley Austin LLP in Washington, D.C. Elisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you very much. And just to get started, I have to start off with a caveat, and that is that the views that I express today are my own and are not necessarily those of the FTC or of any of its commissioners. And with that out of the way, we can move to the next slide, which is into the substance of how to respond to a breach. And we can go to the next slide. So just some quick background on the FTC. The FTC is an independent law enforcement agency, which is the primary data security authority for most businesses. And in that role, the FTC takes enforcement actions, but also does a lot of business and consumer education and policy initiatives. If you take a look at the next slide, you'll see that the FTC has been very active in this area. So these are some of the names of enforcement actions that we've brought. And if you go to the next slide, you can see, though, that enforcement action is not all that we do. We put a lot of resources into educating businesses and consumers about particular data security issues. And the FTC has put together some really great guidance on data breach response. So I encourage you to visit this link that's in the presentation and take a look at the data breach response pamphlet. Next slide, please. So here is an electronic version of that pamphlet, which the FTC published in 2016. And my presentation today will really just be highlighting some parts of this pamphlet, but I encourage you to request a copy of this, to go online and take a look. This is the FTC's main guidance on this subject. Next slide, please. Also available on this website, you'll see a data breach response video, and this is really a more eloquent version of what I am telling you today. So this marches through that pamphlet that I just mentioned and gives some really great guidance on data breach response. Next slide. So the number one takeaway from the FTC's guidance is when a breach happens, take action immediately. What does that mean? What kind of action? Let's take a look at the next slide. So there are 3 steps that you want to take. First, secure your operations, fix vulnerabilities, and send appropriate notifications. And we'll drill down into each of these very, very quickly. Next slide. So securing your operations. So the only thing worse than one data breach is multiple data breaches. So you want to mobilize your response team, as many of the speakers today have mentioned, so that you can prevent more loss. And that goes hand in hand with fixing vulnerabilities. So you need to take steps to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And then you need to think about notification, getting law enforcement involved, talking to business partners who may have been impacted, and of course, notifying the individual consumers whose personal information may have been affected. Next slide. So let's take the first 2 together. I'm going to highlight some key points for securing operations and fixing vulnerabilities. So one of the first things to do is to assemble a team of experts, and this may involve hiring a data forensics team, talking to legal counsel, but it's really going to depend on the nature of your business and of the breach itself. So it may be that you need to involve folks from operations, from HR, communications, investor relations, management, IT. It can run the gamut depending on your business and the breach. And then you need to secure physical areas and stop additional data loss. Many of the presenters have already spoken to some of the key points here, such as taking affected machines offline immediately, but don't turn them off until you talk to your forensic expert. Updating credentials and passwords, if possible, replacing affected machines with clean machines. Next slide, please. Some other things to look out for. Think about removing improperly posted information. So it may be that hacked personal information has been posted, is available on your website or on other websites. So you should think about searching for that and taking steps to take down that information. You want to interview people who discovered the breach, and as another presenter today mentioned, while you're doing all of this, you need to take efforts not to destroy important evidence. Next slide. And then a few other things to think about. So were service providers involved? Do you need to involve them in your data breach response? Do you need to change their access or permissions? Are they taking necessary steps to make sure that no further breach occurs? Think about network segmentation, work with your forensic experts. And then on the communication plan, you really want to take a comprehensive response to this. So think about all of your audiences, employees, customers, investors, business partners. And this can be a tricky one. You don't want to make misleading statements, of course. You need to give enough information that consumers can protect themselves, but you don't want to share information that might actually put them further at risk. And you also want to anticipate questions that they might have. And I have more in another slide about how exactly you can accomplish this balancing act. Next slide. And that takes us to sending notification. So you need to think about your legal requirements. There are state and federal laws that may affect you, state data breach laws, for example. And you'll need to think about talking with law enforcement, whether it's local police or it's the FBI or Secret Service, and talking with them before you make any notifications about what information is appropriate to share. And then you actually want to notify the relevant businesses if business partners were impacted or individuals. Next slide. When you are notifying individuals, you should designate a point person for releasing this information and think about offering free credit monitoring to affected persons. Next slide. So what should you say? Here are kind of the main points that you probably want to make to affected individuals. But again, you're going to have to look at kind of the applicable laws, keep those in mind. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that the FTC actually provides a model letter. So this data breach notification kind of format is available in the pamphlet that I mentioned. And so this you would have to tailor, of course, to your particular situation, but this is kind of a useful outline for the type of information that you may want to share with affected individuals. Next slide. So for more information, after a breach, you can call this phone number. This is a good way to seek guidance from the FTC anonymously. You can also prepare the FTC's Consumer Response Center for calls if you think that is likely, or if you plan to direct consumers there. And for more information, as I mentioned, you can visit our website where you can find this data breach response pamphlet and the video, and of course, many resources on just how to design a secure system from the get-go, which will help you minimize the likelihood that you'll be in the position of having to respond to a breach. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elisa. And I will say to those busy business owners on the call, you know, that data breach response pamphlet is less than 10 pages. It is a quick and straightforward read, as is many of the other pamphlets that they have on their website. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. And so thank you, Elisa, for the information, and to everyone at the FTC for the work being done every day to protect American consumers and businesses. And, you know, with that, I want to thank all of our speakers today for sharing their knowledge and expertise. Now it's time for questions from our audience. Please use the Q&A box in the bottom right corner of your screen, and we'll do our best to get all of your answers, or all of your questions answered. And so I think we'll start out with a question for Jeff Marin. Jeff, are you on the call?
I am here. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can hear you.
I hope it's an easy question.
Hopefully. I outsource my response activities to a third-party provider because a lot of small businesses don't feel comfortable doing this themselves, right? What part can I play?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I should begin this by saying that I am by no means an expert in response plans. So I'll give some thoughts, and I'm sure some of the other panelists have a lot more experience. Yeah, so as far as outsourcing response, I would think that there would still be a key role for the small business owner to play in especially identifying who are the key stakeholders. And I guess I would stress too that it's important to consider third-party stakeholders, maybe organizations that you have contracts with, or maybe supply services to you, parts, or any dependencies that you have for your organization. And anyone that you outsource response to is going to need to know that information. So I think you'll still have a critical role to play in identifying stakeholders, setting up the communication and coordination channels, what are different people's roles and responsibilities, and kind of getting people onto the same page. And I like what one of the panelists said earlier. I think it was that it's important to build some of these relationships, even maybe with law enforcement or vendors, equipment vendors ahead of time. You don't want to have a response, like an event, and be calling maybe a law enforcement contact or maybe someone who supplies your technology equipment and you've never talked to them before. So I think having those relationships ahead of time. So I think you'll still have a part to play in things, building those relationships and kind of coordinating the process with any third-party service provider who's helping you with response plans. But yeah, I'm happy to hear what other thoughts other panelists have.
Any other panelists have any thoughts on enlisting third-party providers and outsourcing response activities?
Yes, this is Tammy. In general, I think that if you have any doubts about your capabilities, you should definitely seek some assistance from a third party. And even if you think that your internal staff can handle the issue, you might want to still consider engaging a third party just to help you avoid some of the pitfalls of incident response, and also just to help keep everybody honest and help make sure, you can either exonerate your own people from being at fault in the incident, or you might find out that there's some issues you weren't aware of, and then you need to make some staffing changes. But I'd highly recommend engaging with a third party. And again, as someone else mentioned, it does depend a little bit on the type of breach, whether or not you'd want to do that. If it's somebody who's been in your network and stealing your data for some time, I would very strongly recommend seeking some third-party assistance.
That's great. Thank you, Tammy. And while I have you on the hook, would you mind addressing some of the worst mistakes one can make when responding to an incident?
Sure. So, antivirus software is critically important to preventing issues like this from happening. But once you have established that there is a breach, antivirus software can be extremely destructive to your evidence. So I would say maybe if you're in the middle of responding to an incident or, doing your forensic investigation, you may want to consider changing the parameters of your antivirus software to log things rather than automatically delete or clean things. And then one surprising thing would be that many people who are information technology practitioners, IT people, are familiar with a website called VirusTotal, where it's a fantastic resource where you can upload files and have them scanned by like 40 plus different antivirus vendors to see what those vendors find wrong with those files. But in today's landscape, most of these threats are very customized to the company that is being targeted. And the moment you upload a file to VirusTotal, you have just played your hand, and that person will know that you have discovered it. So they will change their tactics immediately, and you may lose visibility into what they're doing because now they'll deploy a new version of a file that maybe you haven't discovered yet. So I would say use VirusTotal with the utmost caution. It is much better to take a hash of a file and upload and submit the hash to VirusTotal, and they'll give you information if they've seen the hash before, than it is to actually upload any of your files to VirusTotal.
Great. Thank you so much. And, with this, I want to thank you to FedEx, Media Pro, the FTC, NIST, DHS, SBA, and others for supporting the small and medium business community and helping them to improve their cybersecurity. I encourage you all to visit staysafeonline.org. It's at the bottom of the slide that you see now, and click on the Cybersecure My Business program to continue to learn more. Also shown here are websites and resources from our partners on today's webinar. We want you to know that you're not alone in this. Join our Cybersecure My Business community, and together we will improve the cybersecurity of our small businesses. Thank you for joining us today to learn from our fantastic partners working together to improve the security of businesses of all sizes. Thank you so much.